Good morning, good morning. It's Charmaine Hammond, and we're here today with our first NAOSH Week webinar. We're going to be talking today about how to build a culture of safety, resilience, and respect. And this is a great topic to start the series off with, because if you don't have the culture that supports resilience, that supports safety, you're going to run into a lot more problems. So let me tell you a little bit more about myself and who I am. I know lots of you that are on the webinar today, so welcome. We have a chat box there, and I really encourage you to go in there and type in where you're from. And if you have one thing that you are doing right now in your organization that is really promoting safety, I'd love for you to share that with the group, because part of what happens on webinars is not just the learning that happens from what I share, but more importantly, the learning that happens when all of you share what's working for you in your organizations and what are some of the challenges that you're bumping up against as well, so that we can deal with those. We've got about 45 minutes to run through our content today. We'll get you back to your office by the top of the hour, and a lot of you I know will be watching this on the replay. It is being recorded. We'll send you the recording afterwards so that you can listen to this over and over again. And of course, you can also share this in your organization. It's a simple video link. So in the chat box, I'd love for you to type in where you're from, where you're listening from. I'm in Vancouver today. It's absolutely gorgeous. For those of you that have been watching some of my webinars lately, you know that I've often been recording from San Diego area. And I have to say, today is pretty much the same temperature as it was when we left San Diego last week. All right, a little bit of information about who I am and what I do. I have an interesting background. Like many of you, I've had more than one career in my life. And my first career was actually in the correctional system. I was a correctional officer for close to 10 years. And I started out working in an adult facility for males in Brampton, Ontario, just not too far from Toronto. And from there, I actually found my passion working with young offenders. I was right out of university and college, and I really wanted to change the world, and I wasn't feeling that I was having a big enough impact working in the adult correctional facility. But you know, that experience provided me with information and learning that still serves me half a lifetime forward now. And one of the things, of course, that has really helped me was learning about the importance of safety. And working in a correctional institution, of course, safety is of the utmost importance. And I worked in different facilities, and I quickly learned that in the facilities where there was a high emphasis on respect amongst the coworkers, amongst the teams, our safety went way up. Here's the other interesting learning. When I was working in the correctional system, I was working with some pretty scary individuals, as you can imagine. One of my most profound learnings was that because I have a strong value system about treating people with respect, acceptance, and kindness, that's just kind of who I am and how I was raised. I found that that attitude served me very well in the correctional system, that I was actually safer. And in situations where my safety was compromised, the fact that I was treating people with respect, but also with a sense of firmness, of course, I was able to get through some pretty tough situations. So respect is absolutely critical. We've got some folks here from Calgary. Good morning, Calgary. And your fire alarm just went off. Oh no, you can absolutely, safety first. You can absolutely watch the replay later. And we've got Edmonton, plus 28 degrees in Edmonton. That's amazing. Wow, I think it's going to be about that here in Vancouver. Now, after I left the correctional system, I started working with young offenders, and I was working in what they call a medium secure facility, and it was a program, actually a really neat program, where we were focusing on rehabilitating the youth, but more importantly, also providing them with work experience in the community. And again, safety, the whole element of safety came up in that career. Now I want you to fast forward a little bit. When I left the correctional system, I went back to school, got a master's degree in conflict analysis and management, and really started my practice as a mediator. And I learned some of the most interesting outcomes about how safety and conflict or well-managed conflict was actually impacting safety in the workplace. We're going to be actually talking about that topic tomorrow, but I'll give you a few tips on that today. And then working as a mediator, mediating some of the toughest cases in Canada, some of the largest cases in Canada. Again, the whole concept of the connection between a workplace culture, resilience, and safety kept coming up time and time again, and I thought, I have to do something about this. Now, when I studied my master's degree through Royal Roads University, I had an amazing opportunity to do a thesis on surviving the boom, learning about the unplanned effects on workplace conflict, workplace violence, and workplace resilience. And I was looking at what happens when we go through a period of time in business where the pace is incredibly fast. All of you listening, especially those from Alberta, you can relate to that, where you've got a pace that's incredibly fast and there's no let up, where people are just going full speed ahead and they can hardly keep up with the day-to-day activities. And then when it's sort of like if you imagine an elastic band, when that tension gets stretched and stretched and stretched, eventually there's only so far it can stretch, and then what happens? It breaks, it pops. It's similar to a balloon. If you keep putting air into a balloon and you keep blowing it up, eventually it's either going to pop or it's going to fly out of your hands and make that weirdo noise and take off from you. And the same thing happens in workplaces. We go at such a pace that eventually people can't cope anymore. And when people can't cope, you all know that the safety it could be near misses or actually safety incidents go through the roof. But there's also some other things that happen when people are stretched to the point that they can only stretch. Unresolved conflicts come up. We have issues of resilience that now begins to not only affect people's work performance, but also the actually get damaged. So the culture is incredibly important in setting the tone around how we want to work together and how we're going to be safe together. And I always come back to that analogy of the balloon or the elastic band, because all of us will in the future as well go through those times when the pace is almost unmanageable. It is so busy, so crazy busy, that we can hardly keep up. And what's really important is to keep coming back to the basics. And today we're going to talk about 5 basics to create that culture that promotes safety, respect, and resilience. When I left the mediation world, I left with one big mission. And that mission was actually to bring more kindness into the world. I don't know about you, but we live in a world right now that's pretty busy. We're flooded with information. I mean, we turn on our computers and we have 90 emails to read. Our texts are going off all the time. Our phone is constantly beeping and alerting us. If you have pagers, your pagers are crazy. So we're flooded with a lot of noise and we're flooded with a lot of information. And we work in a world right now where there is high value on immediacy. In the old days when we used to send a fax, do you remember those days? You'd send the fax and there was no sense of urgency that the person receiving the fax would get back to you in 30 seconds. But now with the way that we communicate through email and through texting, through social media, there's much more of a sense of urgency when people expect a result or an outcome back immediately. This puts a lot of added pressure on our workplaces. This puts a lot of added pressure on our relationships. I read a report about, oh gosh, it's probably about 8 years ago, and I'm trying to find this report, and when I find it, I'll share it with you because it was fabulous. It was by a researcher named Lisa Finley. She was talking about the impacts of technology on our productivity as well as on our ability to perform in a resilient manner in the workplace. And she identified a few things that really stood out for me. One of those was that she said that every time we are working on a project, so for example, you're in your office, you're working on a project, you're on a conference call, you're preparing for a meeting, you're focused on that one topic. And then when your phone goes off, when your email binger alerts you that you have emails, when your pager goes off, what happens is that, of course, our attention goes to the noise, to the email binger, or to what's just we've been alerted about. And Lisa Finley was saying that every time we do that transition between what we're working on right now and the new distraction, we actually have a mini stress reaction, that fight or flight scenario that happens for us. That was really interesting to me, and she was saying in the report that because of technology and how we now communicate through technology, we have an additional minimum 64 interruptions or mini stressors throughout the day. Now imagine that when you take an organization of 20 people or a team of 20 people or a team of an organization of 5,000 people. That's a lot of mini stressors that we're dealing with every day. The other interesting point that Lisa brought up was that every time we have those mini stressors that put us into that fight or flight reaction is that we also lose tremendous productivity time. This was so interesting for me. She was saying that every time our brain goes from what we were working on to this new task, the distraction, or the urgent task, we lose about 7 minutes of productivity. Now imagine that, times that by 64 in a day. That's a lot of lost productivity time. So she had suggested in one of her strategies, and I actually tried this, she had suggested that for 30 days, and of course it's 30 days to create a new habit, isn't it? For 30 days to turn off your email binger and to actually check your email at scheduled times. And that was so tough for me, checking the email at scheduled times. She suggested 4 to 5 times a day, and for many of us, we can't imagine doing that. And for some of us, we simply wouldn't be able to do that. We wouldn't be able to be away from that form of communication. And I'm not saying that by choice. I'm saying that our job may require us to be plugged in while we're at work. But if you are able to turn your email bingers off, and if you can actually schedule the times that you check your email, you gain back more productivity. So you might be asking, so how does this all fit in with a culture of safety, respect, and resilience? Here's the thing. When we are more focused, we are less likely to make mistakes. A lot of folks that I talk to in human resources and in the safety industry, they talk about the fact that many near misses and safety accidents or incidents happen because people are distracted. They are not focused. They're multitasking. And I used to be a huge proponent of multitasking. Where's my multitaskers actually with us today? How many of you are multitaskers? You like to do lots of things all at once, or your job requires you to do lots of things all at once? Well, that was me for a long time until I realized that I was making lots of mistakes. I wasn't completing things as effectively as I would have liked to. But that distraction also meant that I was not focused. I wasn't present to where I was. So when I started to change that, it had a significant impact on my productivity, on my resilience, my ability to complete tasks, and ultimately, I believe, my safety. So in terms of what we're going to talk about today is I'm going to give you 5 strategies that you can use to create a culture of safety, respect, and resilience now more than ever, especially in Canada, where we're experiencing some economic downturns, some significant changes in business, doing more with less right now. Some organizations are facing a lot of bad news. There's been layoffs, which means people are doing 1 or 2 jobs now, so their attention is being divided in more ways. So is their focus. and perhaps we might be at risk for more safety incidents or near misses. So we really want to make sure that in this time of change and uncertainty that we create a solid environment. So here's how we do that. We first of all want to think about getting clear on our company vision, goals, and values. When I did my thesis in Fort McMurray, one of the #1 concerns that was expressed to me by safety professionals, human resource managers, leaders, and executive directors in nonprofit organizations, they were saying that the fact that staff weren't thoroughly connected, they weren't feeling connected to their vision, mission, and values of the organization. It seemed like the team worked in more fragmented ways. And I'm not sure if any of you can relate to this, but in organizations that I go into as a consultant, as speaker, because that's what I do now. After I left the dispute resolution world, I followed my passion, which was speaking and training. And I've been teaching for many years, speaking for many years, helping build inspired, resilient workplaces. And so when I go in as a consultant to organizations and companies, I get one really really rich opportunity to see the organization through a completely different viewpoint. I don't work there, and I'm not enmeshed in the relationships that are going on in the workplace. I'm not enmeshed in some of the drama that happens. I'm simply an outsider coming in, and that gives me a wonderful opportunity to see the workplace and the culture in a different way. And I frequently see that people feel disengaged and that they don't feel connected to the vision, mission, and values. And it's those vision, mission, and values that really drive an organization or a company's business activities. It defines how we work together, how we relate together, how we solve problems together, how we provide service. And so it is absolutely critical. And here's an example. In one of the contracts that I was doing with a municipal government organization, I went in to do a team charter. Now, for those of you that aren't sure what a team charter is, it's basically pulling a team together in a facilitated process to explore the questions: how do we work together? How will we resolve conflict together? How will we provide feedback together? How are decisions made in our team? How do we have role clarity? A team charter really outlines how the team is going to work and function together to achieve a certain set of goals and outcomes. And what's critical in the foundation of a team charter, of course, is the company or the team, if they have one, but usually it's a company or organization, vision, mission, and goals. So I went into this municipal organization, and the team had actually had some strife and tension going on. There had been a lot of communication breakdowns. Many of you can relate to this. It's, for some of us, it's normal. You know, lots of communication breakdowns. There had been an increase in safety incidences, many more near misses that were being reported to safety and HR. There were also a lot of unresolved conflicts that were starting to come up again, and the team just wasn't feeling connected. They just weren't working well together. And so when I went in, I had done some work with the leaders and the HR and safety ahead of time, and then I actually had the opportunity to connect with each of the 15 team members ahead of time before going in to facilitate the team process. And one of the things that I heard was that they were feeling disconnected. And I thought that was an interesting word. That word came up so many times in conversation. I'm feeling disconnected. I don't know what my place is. I'm not sure how I'm contributing to the bigger picture. These were expressed by the employees in the team. And what was really interesting is when we went into the facilitated process, the first question I asked is, tell me about your mission, vision, and values for this organization. And one of the employees said, just a minute, I'm going to go get the binder. And I said, what binder? And they went and got the training binder. And they brought the training binder out. And, of course, at the front of the training binder, it had the vision, mission, and values written out. So what was so interesting for me is when I asked the team to create or to tell me what their vision, mission, and values was, they were not able to actually articulate it. They didn't know, and many of them had worked there many years. So they were disconnected, and what became really important for this team is not only to understand and know their vision, mission, and values, but to actually live their mission, vision, and values. So we did some exercises around reconnecting them with that. But what was fascinating is that the more connected they felt to the vision, mission, and values, the more committed they were to living the mission, vision, and values. Really, really important. So that's number one. If we want to create an environment where there is high focus on safety, where there is resilience, and where there's a culture of respect, then one of the things we do is connect people to the vision, mission, and values. And we can do that in a number of ways. We can talk about it. We can have our vision, mission, and values displayed. One of the groups that I worked with, it was a large company, and they were also going through a team charter process and struggling. They had a very long mission, actually. It was really hard to memorize. So the team actually created from this one paragraph mission 5 bullet points that summarized the mission in ways that they could easily remember it. And that was really interesting. When I came in for the second meeting to facilitate their team charter, they actually had tent cards made up in front of them all. And on the outside, so facing one another, what everyone could see was the mission and the values. So they had that on the front of the tent card. And then on the inside of the tent card, they had written down their own contributions to how they as employees and team members were going to live the mission, vision, and values. They did that on their own, and I just thought that was absolutely fantastic and a great example of a team who was really starting to take that culture seriously. Now, another thing that we can do to really promote that culture is to help build relationships. One of the patterns that I've seen as a consultant and a speaker over the years is that team building often happens when crisis occurs or after a crisis occurs. Can any of you relate to this? There's been a crisis or a big change in the organization, so we bring in the team building experts to fix it. And the challenge with that is that building teams is not just a crisis-related incident. Building teams has to do with what we do every day, day in, day out, to build strong, healthy relationships in the workplace. So I'd love you to look at team building as something that happens throughout the year, not just in situations where crisis or challenges happen. One of the contracts that I did years ago raised a very valuable point. He was saying that the company that he worked in, it was a medium-sized company, and they had a pattern that when they would have a slowdown, so it wasn't so much attached to crisis, it was when there was a slowdown in the company, they would invest a lot of energy, time, and resources into team building. And then he raised something very interesting. He said, Charmaine, I think we've created a bit of a nightmare here. And I said, what do you mean? And he said, well, in all the years that we have these slowdowns, that's when we've been doing team building. We do team building outings. We go out into the community and do team building charity work. We do team building fun exercises for our staff. And then the rest of the year, we don't do anything. And he said he was at a staff meeting just prior to me coming in, and one of the employees called it the flavor of the month. And for this particular leader, he was very moved by that conversation that the employee raised, because what it alerted him to was that the team was not necessarily seeing these team building exercises as something that had value. It was being seen as the flavor of the month, and people weren't integrating what they were experiencing and learning in their team building exercises. So when I went in to work with them on team building, we decided to take a new approach to what they had done in the past. We decided to take a year-long approach, and that where part of their staff meetings even, they met every 2 weeks as a staff group, and they were really serious about that. Part of the staff agenda on those meetings was also safety. We added one more addition to that, and that was a team building component. And so every 2 weeks they did something related to team building. Now, interesting observation, relationships improved, conflict decreased, and safety incidences and near misses decreased. And I believe it was because that company really started to look at what can we do to improve the workplace culture. So for those of you that are in the chat room today, I would love for you to share anything that you're doing right now to improve or even enhance, because sometimes it's not broken. It just needs ongoing nurturing. So it's not broken. It just needs ongoing attention and focus. So let's share in the chat room. You can type in the chat room what you're doing right now to promote culture in the workplace, to promote that sense of safety, respect, and resilience in the workplace. Let's learn from each other. So number one, in terms of what we can do, is create that culture, and we get clear on the vision, mission, and values of the organization. The other piece connected to that is if your organization is going through a lot of change, which many of you are, it's really important that we recognize that every individual will deal with change differently. We have folks on our team that want to drive the change. They are so committed to the change that's going on that they want to be up there in the driver's seat. I always explain this in the analogy of going for a ride on a train. So let me explain what I mean by that. When change happens, there's going to be someone leading the change. So that could be the CEO of a company. It could be the executive director of a nonprofit. Somebody is leading the change. A directive has come down about the necessity for change. Now, when we look at our team, there's going to be a lot of different responses to that change, and each of those responses will impact the team environment, the culture, the resilience in a different way. Now, the first thing that happens is when change occurs in the workplace, you'll have employees, you'll have team members who are excited to be up there at the front of the train. They want to also be a conductor. They want to help support leading the change. They might not know what the outcome's going to be or how the change is going to occur, but they've bought their ticket. They're going on the journey, so to speak. Then you're going to have people on a team that are a little more hesitant. They are going to cooperate. They're going to support the change, but they also have a bit of a wait-and-see attitude. So they've bought their ticket, they've stepped on the train, but they're sitting not up at the front, a little part way down. And they might be talking to some of their colleagues about the doubts and the fears they have of the change, but yet they are still committed. Then you have people who have bought their ticket, but they have reluctantly bought their ticket. So they've bought their ticket, they have slowly walked onto the train. They might have packed a lot of luggage so that they can come back quickly or go somewhere else, but they've stepped on the train. They are at least making a conscious decision to be part of the change, but they sit a little closer to the door. They want to have that escape option just in case this is not resonating with them in terms of the change. And then we have people who have bought their ticket and they don't even sit down. They're standing up and they're talking to the other people on the train about all the things that could go wrong, all the things that have been tried in the past that didn't work out, all the reasons to doubt the change. So they have bought their ticket very reluctantly. They are on the train, but they're not really committed. And then you've got people that are standing at the ticket booth. They're not sure if they're going to be hopping on this train or not. They're on both sides of the track, so to speak. Maybe I'll do it, maybe I won't. They don't know what their part is in it. And then you have the train starting to get ready to take off, and you've got people that at the very last minute, they're running to hop on. And you'll have people who are holding their hands out the window saying, come on, come on. And then you'll have other people who are looking at the person who is running to catch the train, and they say, oh, see, that should have been me. Or they start to make comments that are either putting down the change that's happening or putting down the person that's running towards the train. I've used this analogy for years because I have gone through so many change processes in my former role as an employee in the correctional system and also as a company owner when I opened my company 20 years ago. We've gone through a lot of changes in that time. So the question is where do you want to be sitting on the train in times of change, and how can you help employees, how can you help your colleagues be on the train with you, invested in what's going on? And part of how we do that is step number 2, we communicate, and we find a way for people to be involved. So in terms of communication, when we look at a culture of safety, resilience, and respect, communication, I think, is so critical. You've got people now committed. You have people who are connected to the company vision, mission, and values. They know that their contributions are making a big difference in the overall outcomes. But now we have to look into how do we make this happen? How do we live our culture? How do we show up demonstrating our values? And part of how we do that is through communication. Communication is one of the biggest challenges that I see in workplaces that I visit as a consultant, as a speaker, and as a mentor. And there's a lot of common challenges with communication that really get in the way of culture, safety, and respect, and certainly in resilience. So let's talk about some of those challenges. And if you have ideas on some of the challenges that you see in the workplace around communication, I would love for you to share those. Where are people getting themselves into hot water in communication? What are they doing wrong in communication? Or what are some examples of where people are communicating in such a way that it starts to break down the culture? So I'm going to give you a minute to write that in. I'm just checking the potluck. Hey, thanks, Christine, for your comment. Christine says, we did a potluck where all the team members brought something traditional from their ethnicity. I love that. I'm going to read the rest of a comment in a minute, but I love that, Christine. That is a really rich example of team building, but it goes deeper than that. When you do something like having people bring in potluck that demonstrates their country of origin, their traditional values, their food, there are stories that go with the potluck. I would say, Christine, I bet when you had that event and people brought in their potluck, there were stories about where the recipe came from or when they used to eat this particular meal in the country that they used to live in. Stories connect people. Stories are critical in a workplace, and we want to replace the stories that are negative, hurtful, and damaging or disrespectful with stories that promote wellness, stories that promote safety, stories that present a sense of connection. So I love that your organization did that. And then Christine goes on to say that we also did a paint night. Cool, that we all went to an off-site location to paint a picture that we hung in our boardroom. Fabulous example of team building. And that's what I'm looking at. When we think of team building, it's got to be something that also is memorable. Again, stories connect people to go away and talk about that forever. Here's Christine bringing that up as an example on today's webinar. One of the contracts that I did a number of years ago with a colleague of mine, Michelle, was just a fantastic opportunity. It was in Thailand in the middle of February, and we lived in Alberta at the time, so can it get any better than that? So we went to Thailand, and we were working with a pharmaceutical company that had offices around the globe. And many of the employees from these different offices, they had to work and collaborate together from a distance. So they hadn't actually met face to face. So you can imagine what that was like when some of them got together at this event. And part of what we were doing was helping them build trust and relationship across the miles. That was the concept of this work that we were doing with them. And one of the activities we gave them, and it was probably one of my most favorite team building activities I've ever facilitated in my life, we were talking about what trust looked like and what trust felt like and what trust inspired in a workplace. And so we figured we could talk about this, or we could actually learn about trust in a different way. We had with us, we had purchased a whole bunch of those Polaroid cameras that you take the photo and then the picture comes out right away, the old day cameras. We purchased a whole bunch of those and brought those with us with a lot of extra paper to print the photos out on. And then in the exercise, we had everybody break into groups, and I think they were in groups of about 6, and they were given an hour and a half to go out into the community. So that's right, they left the workshop room and went out into the community, and what they did was they had to come back and create a mural about trust. We really gave them basic instructions. Just create a mural about trust. And it was so fascinating to see how this large room of people broken into smaller working teams came back and showed us what trust looked like. They had taken pictures in the community of people showing what looked like trusting behavior. They had created their own images. It was absolutely fantastic. Then what we did is actually put those onto a mural, and the mural later got broken up into pieces of artwork for each of the team members to take away. So when you can do something really creative that creates a memory for people, they'll stay connected to that for a long time. And why does that matter when we relate this back to safety? Is because when people feel connected, they're more present. When people are more present, they're less likely to make mistakes that could jeopardize their own or someone else's safety. So in terms of communication, we want to communicate regularly. We want to communicate in different ways. So in different ways, I mean communicating verbally, communicating through staff meetings. Many of you do staff meetings. That's a great way to share information. Although not everybody is always at every staff meeting. You have people on vacation or away for other meetings. So we have to make sure if staff meeting is being used as one of our primary sources of information, that we have another way for people to get caught up, whether that's staff meeting minutes, whether it's everybody having a buddy that they go back after the staff meeting and communicate with their buddy what they missed at the meeting, whether it's a follow-up email sharing what was discussed and what the key takeaways are. But we have to make sure that we communicate clearly, that we communicate without drama or a lot of the backstory, where people can just simply get the message in a clear fashion. We communicate through cascading messages. So one example is that I just shared. We talk about it verbally, then we talk about it in staff meeting, then we follow up in writing. Those are examples of cascading messages. The other thing that happens in times of change, which is where we see a lot of situations of safety come up, because people are focused on everything that's going on with the change, or perhaps the pace is so incredibly demanding to implement a new change. The work of William Bridges, I absolutely respect. William Bridges has written great books around change and transition. And the way that he describes change can really help us think about creating safe, resilient workplaces in a different way. So when we think about change, we often, and I hear this all the time in the workplaces that I consult and train with, they talk about change as something new starting, something new beginning, something new is coming down the tubes. These are the languages that I hear all the time. Now, interestingly enough, William Bridges takes on a little bit of a different twist when he talks about change and transition. He says that change actually begins with an ending. Change begins with an ending. I thought that was just so helpful to learn that change begins with an ending. So if we think about why people struggle with change in the workplace, they often are not struggling with the new beginning. The new policy, the new process, the new equipment, the new system, the new staff member. They're often not struggling with what is new and beginning. They're struggling with what is ending to bring about the new change. And many of us right now in our workplaces have a lot of endings going on as part of change. There's been layoffs. And type into the chat box if you were having some different kind of endings. There's been layoffs. There's been projects that have come to a standstill because of lack of resources, or it's just not a priority right now. There has been endings in programs. In nonprofit organizations, there's been endings in funding, which has impacted service delivery. So we have to, in our workplaces, help people cope with endings, not just beginnings. And I see, as a consultant and a speaker going into workplaces around the world, I see a lot of emphasis going into helping people with the beginnings, but we need to help them with the endings. Let's remember that lots of people on your team have had endings in their personal life. They have gone through separation or divorce. Maybe they've had a child that was very ill. There might have been illnesses that employee faced. They could have gone through severe financial struggles or job loss or loss in their own family. And not everybody comes to the workplace with good coping skills. I'm just going to say it that way. Not everybody comes with good coping skills. And the way that people deal with loss and change is very individual, just like the moving train analogy I gave. And so what happens is that we have a team now who is being faced with this changing culture, and maybe don't have the skills and the tools to be able to manage the change. So one tip I always give organizations is that when you're dealing with changes, recognize that people are different in how they're going to cope, plan for those differences, and offer support. Many of you have EFAP programs, Employee Family Assistance Programs. This is a time to really connect employees with EFAP. Maybe even bring in a workshop around dealing with change and transition, dealing with endings to welcome beginnings, providing articles in a newsletter. But just staying in touch with people through communication can have a huge impact on how people cope with change, and ultimately how that impacts a resilient organization and a safe organization. So far we've talked about getting clear on the company mission, vision, and values to connect people and to create stories, to build teams, to help them feel and know that they are part of a bigger process. And organizations that are connected to their vision, mission, and values tend to be more resilient and more safe. And then we talked about finding ways to get people engaged, team building, building teams, not just in times of stress, but throughout the year. We've talked about communication, that it's got to be clear and regular, and to use what we call cascading messages, where people are communicating in a variety of different ways. And then we talked about making sure that people get what's being said. We've got to check in that they actually understand what's being communicated. That is critical. That's where a lot of miscommunications happen. On tomorrow's webinar, we're actually going to be talking a little bit more about communication and conflict resolution and the impacts on safety. Now, the third piece that we can do to create a culture of resilience, respect, and safety is to resolve issues quickly and effectively. Issues, meaning conflict, for example. Conflict gets in the way of safety so much. For many, many years, I taught a course called Workplace Violence Prevention. And I was going across the province of Alberta speaking to government organizations, specifically municipal governments, as well as industry. Because when we think about workplace violence, most people think about physical aggression, and that is not the definition. Actually, workplace violence comes in many forms. Some of the forms that I have seen workplace violence occur in were situations of sabotage. So where people weren't giving each other important information so that somebody could look like they dropped the ball or made a mistake, where people were being set up in the workplace. That's an example of sabotage, and it falls under the definition of workplace violence. But we also saw a lot of forms of workplace violence through bullying or harassment, which is a common term in the workplace. We also saw workplace violence coming through in terms of threats, where people were making threats to one another. And in all the work that I've done with nonprofits right up to big corporations over the last 15 years, this is an issue that still is at play for many, many companies. So when we talk about resolving issues, I mean a couple of things. Number one is that when we have concerns, we have to raise those right away. Little issues get bigger over time. When I was at a Jack Canfield conference, for those of you who don't know who Jack Canfield is, he was the creator of Chicken Soup for the Soul book series with Mark Victor Hansen, but I love his book called Success Principles. It's 64 success principles that are so applicable to business. And he was talking about something that was very, very interesting around perception and how little things become bigger. And in the one example, he said, imagine going for a hike and you got this little tiny stone, a little tiny pebble in your shoe. The more you walk on it without removing it, all you can focus on is the pebble. And by the end of the walk, that little pebble feels like a boulder in your shoe. Little things become bigger. So it's the same thing with communication problems and conflict. Little issues become bigger if they're not addressed. Here's the other thing that can happen. So imagine you're working in an organization that's going through some change. People are struggling with the endings to welcome the beginnings. The workplace culture may not be as resilient as it has been in the past, and you've got these little problems that keep coming up. The photocopier keeps breaking. Somebody ordered the wrong coffee. I know these are small, and some people might be thinking they're not even worth worrying about. The problem is imagine that each of these is a little pebble in the shoe. The coffee maker, the photocopier, the form that people are supposed to be filling out for safety is not quite working. Whatever it is, all those little pebbles create a more cumulative effect or response in the workplace. And it can really build up in terms of people's patience, their ability to cope, their ability to be resilient. And of course, if they're focused on other things, frustrations, they may not be focused on safety. Now, it's not just about the little things, it's about providing feedback right away. We often experience situations in the workplace that get under our skin, or you'll hear from people in the workplace that situations are going on that are getting under their skin. It's really important that we provide people the tools, we mentor them, support them, so that they can actually provide feedback to their colleagues, even to their supervisors, so that little issues don't become big problems. Little pebbles don't become big boulders. Now, conflict is something that we're going to spend time on tomorrow on the webinar, because that conflict has huge impacts on how safe and resilient our workplace is. But there's a quote that I love, and I'll probably say it tomorrow because it's such a great quote. It's by Judge Esty, and Judge Esty says that conflict is not like wine. It doesn't get better with age. Conflict is not like wine. It doesn't get better with age, and it's so true. What it says to us, that statement, is that we have to resolve conflict quickly and effectively. And conflict gets in the way of resilience and safety at such a high level that if we don't address conflict, what's happening behind the scenes is that people go away and they build their camp. You've seen it happen in the workplace. People are frustrated. A conflict is going on. People are not feeling like they're being heard. The conflict is not being addressed. And then what happens is people go away and pick a side of the fence to sit on. They pick a camp. And what that does to a workplace culture is it starts to divide the culture. We have these silos that are happening. We have Group A and Group B instead of a group of people working together. And then what happens is in those silos or in those camps, old issues that happen to the people in those camps starts to build as well. And they start to recur. Old problems start to become current again. They're brought up to the forefront. The other thing that happens, though, is people start to spend time building their arguments. So instead of focusing on what's right and what's good and what's working, they focus on what's wrong, what's not working, and what is frustrating them. And again, when their focus is there, it takes them off the focus of safety. You know, there's some great statements. One of the statements I absolutely love, this is not my statement, and I'm not sure who said it to credit the person, but the statement goes like this: what you focus on expands. Where you put your energy is what will grow. And so if we're focusing on conflict, everything that's wrong, all the things that are frustrating us, we are not focusing on safety. We're focusing on what frustrates us and probably bringing more of that into our life and into our culture. Part of what we want to do in creating culture is really helping people with mindsets. Here's a great example of a question I used to use in mediation all the time. Instead of asking the question, what's not working? What's wrong with this? Instead, you can just reframe it and say, what is working? What's working right? What's going well? So we've talked about communication, building a culture where people are connected to their vision, mission, and values, resolving issues early. The last two that I want to spin off on are promoting resilience and doing review and learns. In terms of promoting resilience, resilience, in my opinion, and this is my definition, it's usually described, actually, let me start with the typical definition. Resilience is usually described by the theorists and research as the ability to bounce back after change, conflict, crisis, and adversity. After working with thousands of employees, hundreds and hundreds of workplaces, I decided that maybe resilience needed to be something different than bouncing back. Because if we just bounce back, we're going back to the old habits, old belief systems, old patterns, old ways of showing up. And that doesn't necessarily promote change and moving forward. So I decided that I was going to call resilience the ability to bounce forward after change, conflict, crisis, and adversity, which means that after we go through a struggle, that we actually promote people's ability to move forward so that learning has occurred, so that people are healthy, people are developing the skills that they need to cope and deal with what's happening in a work and personal in a personal life, really. And so how do we promote resilience? We promote people taking time for self. We promote the basics. Taking time for lunch and coffee break away from your computer. We get into these patterns where coffee break is now turned into a chime to check our email. But that's not a break, that's still working. It's where we take opportunity to do things like going for a walk as a team for 10 minutes. I had one company, actually, a provincial government organization that worked in a high-rise. And so at coffee break, they had a running group. Coffee break in the morning, 10:15 and 2:15 in the afternoon. They'd meet on the first floor, and they'd actually do the stairs together for 10 minutes. And all of a sudden, this little team of 10 turned into 50 people, so it got way too many people going up and down stairs, and it became unsafe. I love that they took an issue and dealt with it right away to promote safety. So as soon as they started to get this crowd forming, they decided, let's take it around the block. So 50 people from the office building walking around the block for 10 minutes at break. What it did, though, in addition to promoting resilience, is it promoted relationships across the organization. It connected people that don't normally work together and see each other. And I thought that was a great example of promoting resilience. We have to also promote resilience by the language that we use. So instead of walking around saying, I'm so stressed out, I'm burnt out, I can't take this anymore, I'm so frustrated. Those are the comments we hear when people are not resilient. We want to reframe that and really focus on people coming from a more positive or hopeful perspective. So pay attention to the language that you're using in the workplace, because it'll really ripple out quickly. If you're using resilient language, you'll quickly notice that the people around you start to follow suit and they start to use resilient language. We really want to promote a culture of resilience where people's resilience matters. Even things like what we put in our company newsletters, the posters that we have up in our lunchroom, those can all quietly promote resilience. Then the last piece we want to do is review and learns. I love the review and learn process, and I know a lot of you use this already in your organization. A review and learn process is this. A review and learn process helps us look at something we've just experienced. It could be a change, implementation of a new policy. It could be we've gone through some layoffs in our company and we're now looking at sort of pulling things together and getting back on track in our organization. It might be that we've had a new staff member join us, we used a new recruiting process. Whatever the change is, or the implementation that you've done, or the project you've completed, use the review and learn process. And there are 4 questions. Number 1 is, when you're doing a review and learn process, and this is a great way, again, of connecting team, building resilience, and building that culture of safety, respect, and resilience, is ask the question, what worked well? So we've just gone through this change. What worked well? And chart the answers. Chart them on a meeting document, a sort of a minute or decision tracker document. Chart it on a flip chart. I've seen people create vision boards from it. Whatever you can do to chart the information is very useful for you in future. So what went well? Question number 2 is, what was a challenge? What was a challenge? So what did we experience? What did we bump up against? What were some of the things we didn't plan for? What was a challenge? Question number 3 is, what did we learn? So what did we learn about ourselves? What did I learn about myself? What did you learn about yourself? What did we learn about our team? What did we learn about how we manage change as a team? What did we learn about how resilient we are? What did we learn about safety? So what did we learn? What went well? What was a challenge? What did we learn? And question number 4 is, what will we do differently? This is the key question. What will we do differently next time? Because typically there will be a next time. There will be another change. It might be different, but there'll be another change. There will be another safety incident or another near miss. Review and learns are so important in near misses. I love it when organizations have strong policies around when a near miss has been reported. They go through a review and learn process. What worked well about how it was handled? What was a challenge? What did we learn? Our policy doesn't work, or our system doesn't work, our policy's outdated. What did we learn? Or that we're on track, we just need to train staff to know how to implement the policies. And what will we do differently? Those 4 questions can be so powerful and helpful in building a culture of safety, respect, and resilience. The more that we do to build that culture, the better we work as a team, the safer we are as a team, and the more resilient we are as a team. And this is so important because that foundation can help you time and time again as you go through the years. So that was the information we wanted to cover today. We are almost at time. I hope you got some value from that. I love talking about how resilience, safety, and culture all mesh into one because they are so closely connected. Now tomorrow, on tomorrow's webinar, we're going to be talking about how conflict resolution processes can increase safety and reduce near misses and mishaps. I'm going to share with you a couple of models for how to address safety and how to address how to address conflict in a way that promotes safety, both in the moment, so where you've got something urgent that's happening right now, a bit of a crisis or a conflict, how do you address it in the moment? And then how do you go back and deal with it after the fact? Because sometimes when we're in a situation of safety or crisis, we can only do enough to manage the situation in that moment, but then there has to be a whole other process that happens afterwards. So I'm going to share a couple of models for how to communicate in those situations, what I call a courageous dialogue model, and I'll share a process for managing conflict. I'm also going to share tomorrow a process for facilitating dialogue. Often many of you have to facilitate dialogues between people. I did that as a mediator, and there's some very useful skills that you can do when you are facilitating processes, whether they be related to conflict, safety, resilience, or anything in between. What you do in that facilitation process can really make a difference in your results and your outcomes. So we'll be talking about that. Now, if you haven't registered for tomorrow's webinar, there's a link right here on the screen. If you scroll way down to the beginning of the chat box, you'll see that link. I will also send the link out again to all of you. It's being recorded, so if you can't show up live, no problem. We'll send you the video replay. I want to thank you all for joining us today and for your comments, and I look forward to hearing from all of you around what you're doing to create a safe, respectful workplace, and give yourself credit for everything that you're doing right now that is already achieving that. Kudos to all of you. It's all of those little efforts that create a big, positive, powerful outcome. Thanks again for joining us. I'm Charmaine Hammond, and we'll see you tomorrow.